Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Sorry to stop the really good discussion. It sounds like you're already having some really good conversations about this. Welcome to this briefing event for the UK Aerospace Research and Technology Programme's Fast Track Collaborative R&D and Collaborative R&D competitions. I'm John Morley from Innovate UK. I'm the head of aerospace there. And we work in sort of partnership with both BAYES and the Aerospace Technology Institute to actually deliver the elements of this programme that we'll brief you on today. So as a quick overview, the UK Research and Technology Programme is a joint government and industry venture, 3.9 billion investment in research and technology out to 2026 to sort of maintain and grow the UK's competitive position in civil aerospace design and manufacture. It's addressing large-scale technology and capability challenges, principally over this sort of 5 to 10 year rolling time frame, and it provides sort of grant funding, typically up to 50% for the larger sort of research projects, but it does depend on the size of the enterprise that you are coming from in this competition, as you'll see a little bit later on. Just to give you an overview, I mentioned there it's a partnership. So the UKART programme is the Aerospace Technology Institute, who are actually responsible for developing the technology strategy, which underpins actually the whole programme itself, and also oversees the R&D pipeline and works with industry to actually generate the ideas for projects coming through into the pipeline. BAYES are accountable for the programme budget, and ourselves as Innovate UK, we help with the administration, the independent assessment of the applications, and managing the contracts of the projects downstream. But the three of us work collaboratively together. Just to give you an idea of what the programme is to date, there's sort of 211 projects currently, a value of about £2 billion in total project value, 1.1 billion in grants. What's really good as well is there's a high proportion of SMEs that are actually involved in these larger projects, sort of 115 to date, directly contracted. There's many, many more SMEs actually involved in the programme as part of subcontracts and working with these larger programmes of work. Just to give you a quick overview, the actual portfolio itself broken down 4 main areas. You can see there, Aerostructures, smart and connected, aircraft and propulsion. This information is all available for you to download off the Aerospace Technology Institute website. And I'd sort of advise you, if you haven't already done so, please go to the website and have a look. Because as well as the stats on the projects that are being funded, there's some really good case studies. There's also that's where you can download the UK Aerospace Strategy. And again, if you haven't got a copy of this, you can register through the website and actually download a copy of that document. Moving on to today's briefing, just to give you an idea of what that £3.9 billion programme looks like. We are initially set up and was working on this strategic programme. Since sort of the last few years, we've started to sort of broaden that and look at funding around the NATEP and the collaborative R&D, which we're looking at today. So we've also got open at the moment a call around sort of international work, this UK, Sweden, UK bilateral call, we call it the Eureka call. But today's focus is about looking at this collaborative competition and what it entails. So I'd like to hand over to Christina, who will take you through a little bit more around actually the specifics of these 2 competition streams that we have open today, and to also give you details around the scope of what is and what isn't within the core competition that we have at the moment. So thank you, Christina.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Christina Garcia Duffy, and I'm the Head of Technology Strategy for the Aerospace Technology Institute. If you've applied before to Innovate UK funding or to one of the CR&D calls that John just mentioned in the past, you may know that we always run these calls associated to a particular scope. And this is a list of technology themes that we've down-selected from the strategy where we feel that there's not enough work going on or that we need to fill in in terms of delivering this strategy. So I'm going to give you an overview of the scope for this particular call today, and hopefully you will get more information during the breakout. I believe there's some printouts available. There's a more detailed scope document that can be downloaded, and I'll give you the details of where to find that. You can pick up a copy. Noor, my colleague from ATI, has them on the table today. I will give you the briefing on the top-level themes, so we can discuss that. So for this CR&D call, the aim is to incentivize the supply chain. So we want to grow the number of SMEs and organizations within the supply chain in our portfolio. We think there's a number of themes that are amenable for supply chain organizations to work on, and we're looking for high risk, high impact, perhaps longer term technology developments within this call. We've split the competition into 3 streams. There's what we call collaborative fast track stream, and Alexis later on will explain what that means. We have a collaborative R&D stream, and we will have a collaborative feasibility study stream. Today, we will talk about the first 2. The competition call for expression of interest is open now, and it's for the collaborative fast track and the collaborative R&D. There's a total of 20 million grant funding available for these types of calls. We see this as the first one of a series of regularly scheduled calls. For this particular one, which is open now, we have up to 8 million in grant. So as I mentioned, today we're focusing on collaborative fast track and collaborative R&D. In terms of the scoping, this competition seeks to support in addressing the technology strategy that we already launched. There's more details that you can find on the Aerospace Technology Institute website. There's detailed documents on the strategy that you can download to see what the scope of what ATI is looking to fulfill. We did a review of the current portfolio of projects, and based on that review, we extracted some technology themes that we felt were either not addressed through the current programs or that needed more work. So some projects may have been going on, but we felt that more work was required on those areas. All those themes have formed the scope for the current call. And as always, the scope is indicative. We only know what we know, and there may be very good ideas and very good projects that may not be particularly aligned to one of the themes for the call. We're quite happy to receive other ideas as long as they are within the Raising Ambition strategy, which is our UK Aerospace Technology Strategy. So talking a little bit more about Raising Ambition, if you're not familiar, back in 2015, we published quite a detailed technology strategy. It's a market-led strategy, and it has technology themes linked to that market. So looking at the market landscape, what sort of aircraft we thought are coming into the future, looking at the UK supply chain and what we already do for some of the larger companies delivering these aircraft and what we could do based on UK capabilities. We developed a set of 11 documents in total, aligning to different technology areas for that strategy. There's a lot of information in those. It's quite technical, quite detailed, but it might be very informative if, say, you're interested in a particular area of, say, systems. There's quite a detailed document on what we're looking for into that. 11 documents is not very easy to read, so we summarized the main outcomes from those documents into a public version of the strategy, which was released in July 2015. At the time, the ATI had just been established. So during the following year, we did a review of the portfolio of projects, and we did a review of what people and organizations were working on, and we released a revised strategy refined in July 2016. All of these documents are available in the Aerospace Technology Institute website. So if you're interested in having a better view of what Raising Ambition is all about, I would encourage you to download the strategy document from the website. In terms of the technical detail, the strategy focuses on 4 major technology themes. And you've seen before from John, we segment the portfolio of projects also in these 4 areas. We have aircraft of the future, which touches on cross-cutting themes, processes and tools, aircraft architectures, new next generation sort of aircraft architectures. We have a theme on systems, which we call smart, connected and more electric aircraft. We have a theme on structures with a lot of manufacturing in it, called Aerostructures of the Future. And lastly, we have the Propulsion of the Future major technology theme. In 2016, we highlighted a number of cross-cutting activities that we felt had not been addressed in the July 2015 strategy, just because they're cross-cutting in nature, and at that time we were still investigating what the UK aims would be for some of these themes. So we highlighted 5 cross-cutting agendas. Obviously, since 2016, we've moved on with developing more thinking behind these areas. You can see more detail on those on a series of insight papers that we've released since 2016 on each of the topic. But for today's thinking, keeping in mind the 4 major technology themes will give you an idea of what Raising Ambition covers. ATI is mainly civil in application, so we look mainly at technologies that have a primary function within the civil aircraft market, both fixed wing and rotary wing. So keep that in mind as well. Spillovers are great, so if the technology has applications to other sectors like defense or nuclear or railway, that's good, but the main primary application of the technology that we look at is for civil aircraft aerospace. Going into the detail for the scope of this particular call, we have, as I mentioned, the collaborative fast-track projects. The focus on these is accelerating small and medium enterprise innovation. We expect that based on the scope we've put together, these funding would go to projects where technologies are developed and have an exploitation route within the next, so 2-3 years after project completion, so quite short scales after the project has finished, and we're looking at boosting competitiveness on those organizations now. Going into more detail on the technology themes, we've highlighted 4 main areas that we would be interested in getting proposals on. There's more detail on the website and also on the handouts that we have here, but top level, we're looking at technologies to enable future sensing for harsh environments and integrated vehicle health management, or HOMS, you may know it for other names. So what we're looking at is sensor systems, measurement techniques that operate in harsh environments within a rotary wing sort of area or rotary area, and engine. We're also looking at embedding sensors into composite structures. The second theme we've highlighted is on the structures and materials side, monolithic and composite materials or coatings that would improve the tolerance in, again, extreme conditions. And we're looking at materials or structures that can cope and perform better within environments including high pressure, high temperature, high voltage, resistance to corrosion, fatigue, things like impact, lightning. Third theme is on the systems side, and we're looking to create secure, smart, connected, and efficient subsystems and components. So there's quite a large variety of technologies we're looking in this area. We're looking at technologies to enable communication systems, more modular security solutions, development and design of thermal management subsystems and components, and it could include different ways of making the components, like for example, heat exchangers manufactured using additive manufacturing or other more innovative techniques, or phase change materials, different ways of making heat pipes and things like that. And last, we have a theme on improving factory efficiency. And that topic could include factory automation, things like robotics, but we're also looking at different processes for in situ monitoring and inspection, different ways of enabling reconfigurable tooling for large structures which are affordable or more affordable. And lastly, we had quite a lot of work done on the digital side of things. So we're looking at how to implement some of the digital technologies in a factory environment so that it can enable a better interaction and better working ways with the supply chain. So those are the 4 areas we've highlighted for the fast track. I will move along to the collaborative R&D projects. These are more longer term sort of technologies that we're looking for. So just naturally they would be lower in their process of development, and by that I mean we are not looking for technologies that may be exploited in the next product, say 4 years after, 2 to 3 years after the project completion, or 4 years from now. We're looking at longer term exploitation. So we don't mind if there's no specific market opportunity for these, as long as there's a robust case around the importance of the technology and the impact that the technology may have. So riskier, more long-term sort of projects, what we call position projects. And we've highlighted 5 areas of technology themes for these. You will see that they're longer term in exploitation. The first one is around increased autonomy on aircraft operations, so technologies that will enable single crew, single pilot operations, things like use of augmented reality or apps that the pilots can use to reduce their workload, use of artificial intelligence technologies to help in collating and getting the appropriate data to the pilot in a more efficient way. We're looking as well on the autonomy side of things at getting technologies perhaps from the automotive world into the aerospace world to enable autonomous taxiing for aircraft. Another of the areas on the strategy for position, there's quite an emphasis on more electric aircraft as the shorter term trend for aerospace. In the longer term, we're looking at more hybrid electric sort of arrangements for different sectors within the market. And to enable more hybrid electrics, we have highlighted this topic on high power density electrical machines and power electronics. So there's a lot of work on the systems side to develop next generation power electronics and electrical machines that would still make sense in terms of weight, the way they're packaged, sizing. So it's trade studies and a lot of design on how these architectures would work on a hybrid electric sort of world. The third one, looking again at long term, is for the past 60 years, aircraft have been very much the same in architecture, specifically large civil aircraft. Tube and wing configuration is the norm. Looking forward, hybrid electric offers a lot of advantages in the sense that you don't need to have your power in one place. You can have distributed propulsion, you can have different architectures, and we realize that there's not enough done to enable the design of more radical architectures, both as in aircraft architecture, but also in the propulsion system. So we would very much like to see projects around developing preliminary sort of software tools and algorithms so that we can predict the likely performance of this new configuration of aircraft. The fourth topic we're talking about is enabling the next generation of materials and processes, so longer term development, self-healing, sort of self-monitoring structures. Very important fastener-free composite assembly application that would drive the cost down of manufacturing tremendously. And things like multifunctional materials, so structures and materials that can function as a structure but also as a sensor or an antenna or a different sort of component. Lastly, we're looking at onboard communication systems, and again, like in the high power density electrical machines and power electronics, is all driven by weight, size, and flexibility of the system. So technologies, projects that could enable a reduction on the size and weight, power cost of these components. So that's it in terms of the scope in a nutshell. There's a lot more information available on the website. We'll be here around if you have any questions, and we're quite happy to take questions either today, offline. We're happy to be contacted. Just a bit on the projects that will not gain funding. As I mentioned, ATI has a very specific remit. Our scope is on civil applications, and it's mainly technologies on board aircraft. So projects that are primarily aligned to other sectors, say defense or space, are not our priority. We encourage technologies that can be utilized in other sectors, but they must have a civil aerospace remit. We're also an industrial-based organization, so we fund primarily projects that are in the mid-section of development, so things that are very fundamental research, what would be done in a university environment, or things that are experimental research towards product development, we can't fund either. I leave you with some links on how to engage. For more details on their scope, you can go to the Aerospace Technology Institute website, and we encourage, if you're thinking about putting a proposal together, come and engage with us. We're quite happy to help you with understanding if your scope is within our remit or not, if we can suggest groups or partners. We hold sometimes networking events and things like that. And then there's further information for anything to do with application. Innovate UK are leading on that, so please go to the Innovate UK site where you can find more details, and Alexis will be providing a very detailed overview of how to apply now. And with that, I leave you for some questions and answers.
If you feel, I'm not sure how your application looks like, but you have to define the scope to make it to the gateway, I guess. So if you feel you fall in, you might have one central scope, you fall into one area, but you will have an overlap with other scopes, sub-scopes or whatever you call it. You put this also into consideration, or are you telling us to focus on one area of the scope?
So I believe the projects can be cross different scopes. So you could be looking at sensors for harsh environments combined with multifunctional structures. So
are you talking about my project?
So you can fall within different areas of the scope. It's not a problem. Usually the programs are quite cross topic, so highlighting different areas is always a positive.
It's beneficial.
Yeah.
It is, yes.
So I think we're not saying you must pick one of the streams that you're most aligned to. I think it's really good that you may have a leaning to one or more of those streams, and it's making it clear in your scope which of the bits that you're addressing. I think, as Christina said, the really important thing is making sure that you are within the confines of the aerospace strategy, the raising ambition strategy, and it's clear which of these that you're addressing.
So it's not a tick box exercise. It's a narrative.
No,
it's a narrative you have to provide.
Correct.
Are you going to talk about the review process and the timelines?
Yes, Alexis will do that.
Yes, after coffee we'll go through what I call the mechanics of the application process and what we require from you.
Can you elaborate? You just excluded universities and experimentation universities. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, I'm going to go to Christina.
Yeah, so we do not exclude universities, but the projects have to be led by an industrial organization. We're quite happy for universities to collaborate on projects.
Okay, excellent.
We have to show that it's actually business-led. It's being led by
Okay, no
business,
problem.
yeah. Brilliant.
Oh, very quickly. What's the definition of collaborative? And how many companies are we talking about?
So Alexis will talk about that later.
Well, we'll say
Yes.
this afternoon, but I can let you sneak, because I know this one. There is more than one partner.
More than one.
And not.
Okay, so I'm going to start again, and I'm going to talk about the competitions process, the mechanics of how that works and how the assessments will work. My colleague Joe will also be presenting some of the slides and available for any questions that you have about the process or the finances. So I'm Alexis, I work for Innovate UK. And I'm going to talk about the eligibility criteria and the participation rules. The application process, so if you have applied to Innovate UK before, you've probably used our innovation funding service. And that, for the expression of interest phase, asks you to fill in project details and application questions. I'm going to talk about submitting your application, the assessment, and then the stage 2 for invited applicants, and a little bit about the collaborative feasibility study that's coming up and the portfolio approach we're going to take. And then we'll have more time for question and answers. If you are asking a question, if you could grab one of the mics, just so we can pick you up on the video so that anyone who's watching afterwards gets the benefit of your question as well. So for both of these competitions, to be eligible, you need to be a UK-based organisation. You need to be carrying out aerospace research or technology development project in the UK. You need to be addressing the themes of the competition. So Christina highlighted those in her talk. And making sure that you're aligned with the Aerospace Technology Strategy. So also as part of this competition, you need to sign up to the Aerospace Technology Institute Framework Agreement. So you can find more details of that on the ATI website. You need to be working in collaboration, and I will go into exactly what the definition of that is for us. And you need to be conducting industrial research. So for state aid, there are different categories of research. You can go on the Innovate UK website to see exactly what those are, and we're funding industrial research for these two competitions. So in a bit more detail about the fast track collaborative R&D. So project costs need to be between 425,000 and 1 million. So that's total project costs for your consortium. Duration between 12 months and 2 years. And ideally, your projects will be starting by August 2019. So please bear that in mind when you're thinking about your consortium, when you're thinking about your collaboration agreement, all the things that need to be in place by August 2019, typically. So about multiple applications, so you can lead on one application and collaborate in a further 2 applications. So for the fast track, we're looking for SMEs to be the lead. So again, if you need the definition of SME, it's on the Innovate UK website. So large businesses, research organisations, charities, public sector organisations, they can't lead, but they can collaborate. So as you're not leading, you can collaborate in any number of applications. You can also have partners with no funding. So if, for example, you want to partner with a non-UK business, we would not be able to give them any grant funding, but their project costs would count towards your total project costs.
Sorry, excuse me, sorry.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that last point? If you take a partner, for example, a US partner, myself, does that count as the collaboration?
No, so collaboration needs to be 2 grant-claiming partners. So for the collaborative R&D, the costs, again, from 425,000, but up to 1.5 million total project costs. And the duration for this can be up to 3 years. And again, we're looking for projects to start by August 2019. So to be a lead on the collaborative R&D projects, you just need to be a UK business of any size. So you don't have to be an SME for the collaborative R&D. And again, if you're a business that's not leading on an application, you can be a collaborator in up to 3 applications. If you're a research organisation, so universities or charities or public sector organisations, you can't lead, but you can collaborate on any number of applications. And again, the same applies for partners with no funding. So types of organisations that we fund. So for the fast track, the lead needs to be an SME. For the collaborative R&D, it just needs to be a UK-based business. Research organisations, when we say research organisation, we're talking about universities, non-profit distributing research and technology organisations, public sector research establishments, and research council institutions. For public sector organisations, if you were partnering with them, they need to be doing research-based activity, and then they will count as part of your research organisation percentage in your project. So, eligibility for state aid. In order to be eligible to receive state aid, you've got to pass what's called an undertaking in difficulty test. So this only applies to limited liability companies that are more than 3 years old. If you have a parent company, the test can be performed on the parent or holding company. But it's your responsibility to make sure that your business is eligible before you submit an application. And if you are successful in the competition, we will apply this test as part of our viability checks. So if you're unsure of whether you are eligible, whether you would pass this test, please do seek legal advice. The basic definition is that where there's more than half of a company's subscribed share capital has disappeared as a result of accumulated losses, then you are thought of as an undertaking in difficulty. So if you do fail this test, it's not an immediate, we can't fund you. We will get in contact, see if you have updated accounts that we can look at, or if you have a parent company. But it's just something to bear in mind. So participation rules. Again, this is under state aid funding. So the aim of state aid is to optimise level of funding to businesses, but also recognising that importance of the research base for a project. So at least 70% of your total eligible project costs must be incurred by a business. And the maximum level for research organisations is 30% of project costs. So that is shared across, if you've got multiple research organisations, that's shared across all of your research organisations.
Sorry, can I have a question?
Could you pick the microphone, sorry?
If I have a research organization as a subcontractor, does this also count to the 30%, or does it count to the 70%? So if they don't collaborate, but if I buy in some, let's say, testing services, which might be very specific to a particular research organization, I will get an invoice from them, and then I pay the invoice. That would probably contribute to the 70%, not to the 30%.
So my colleague Joe has the answer for you.
Yeah, so that would still count towards the 30% research participation. So any costs incurred by research organisations, be it them as an actual grant claiming partner or as a subcontractor to a business, they would still count towards the 30% limit. So that's something that's worth bearing in mind.
Okay, thank you.
So what is collaboration? So it is at least 2 organisations claiming grant within the application, and that must include the lead. So the lead must be grant claiming. We're looking for business-led consortiums. You can involve both business and research base, but in your application, we're expecting you to evidence why the structure of your collaboration, but also why it's beneficial to be in a collaboration with the consortium you've decided. So if you do have outstanding final claims or independent accountant reports on any live Innovate UK projects, you would not be eligible to apply for grant funding for this competition as a lead or as a partner organisation. So this is something that we've used because we want to make sure that companies are making the most of grant funding and really putting that back into the UK economy. So please bear that in mind. we want to make sure that you're exploiting the grant funding that you're getting to the maximum. So key dates for this competitions. So they're both already open. If you've been onto the ATI website or if you've been on the Innovate UK website, you'll have found a link to get to where to apply to those competitions. For these two, the fast track collaborative R&D and the collaborative R&D, the closing date is noon on the 5th of December. So it's an automated system. It does lock you out at noon. So if you haven't pressed that submit button before noon, you will not be able to enter this round of the competition. So applicants are informed on the 11th of January. So if you've been successful, you will get a link to the Stage 2 competition, and that will be open from the 14th of January. And the Collaborative Feasibility Studies competition, it was also open from the 14th of January. So how to actually apply using the Innovation Funding Service, so IFS. So our users are all over the world, basically. So IFS does help you to collaborate with project partners wherever they are in the world. And this map shows the location of IFS users from July 2017 to May 2018. So as you would expect, the majority are in the UK, but the next largest number is the US, and then China, India, Colombia, and Germany. So it's not a barrier to you collaborating with overseas partners. So searching for a funding competition, reviewing the criteria. If you go to the Innovation Funding Service homepage, you can use the keyword search, and you will hopefully find the UK Aerospace Research and Technology Programme, so the Fast Track Collaborative R&D EOI and the Collaborative R&D EOI. So when you click on the competition name, it takes you to more details about that competition. So it's a tabbed view. You have the summary, the eligibility, the scope, and you press on the green button to start a new application. It's quite straightforward. So to apply for the competition, the lead applicant needs to create an account. So if you've applied previously through Innovate UK, you just sign in to your existing account. So you can use Companies House to search for your organisation details, or you can enter them manually. We do advise research organisations to manually enter the information. So you'll find the terms and conditions for this competition. Once you've logged on, this is your application overview page. So from here you can set up your consortium and team members from your own organisation. So you'll be able to invite people from other organisations. Those are the terms and conditions. So there are specific terms and conditions for the UK Aerospace Research and Technology Programme. If you've applied before, you'll be quite familiar with the standard Innovate UK terms and conditions. There is a slight amendment for this specific programme. So when you're inviting a partner, you use the application team link. You can add contributors. So contributors are people from your own organisation, or you can add collaborator organisations. So for the expression of interest, we're not asking for detailed finances from each partner, but you might still want to invite them to get them used to IFS, because at the full stage, we will be asking them to complete their company's finances. So when you're answering a question in IFS, you can assign it to someone else within your organisation or within another organisation. You can click on the drop-down for the online guidance, so that's more details about what we're looking for in your answer to the question. You can use bold, italic, you can use numbered lists, you can use bulleted list. You can't put any graphics in there, any diagrams. If you're allowed an appendix, then it has to be in PDF format, maximum of 1 megabyte. You'll see on the left-hand side the mark as complete. So before you can submit, you need to mark all of the questions as complete. So if you do mark it as complete and you think you want to edit it before you've submitted it, you can go back. So that's not a, I've clicked it and it's definitely, I can't go back and change it. Right up until you submit, you can actually edit it. So the application form layout. This is a screenshot from IFS, so we've designed IFS to make it user-friendly. So for the expression of interest, we're asking you to complete project details and then also application questions. So for the project details, the application team, that's where you can invite your collaborator organizations or others from your own organization. The application details, we're asking you to confirm the research, confirm the title of your competition, the timescales, and we do ask you if it's a resubmission. That's a standard Innovate UK thing, just so we can track if you have submitted to Innovate UK before. We ask you about the research categories. So as I've said, industrial research is what we're funding for these two competitions. The project summary, so it's highlighting the need or the challenge. It's setting the scene for the assessors. The scope, again, it's important that your project's within scope. So users feel to justify how your project fits in the scope. If you're unsure, please talk to ATI about those themes and about the wider UK Aerospace strategy to make sure that you are in scope and you are framing it correctly when you answer this scope question. So these questions, they're not marked, but they set the scene for the Innovate UK independent assessors, and they also help ATI to identify which theme you're going into. So the actual questions, we've got 10 questions. And you can see you're allowed appendices for 4 of those questions. So there is, I'm going to go through the questions, but I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because when you go online, you can see much more detail of the question. So you have the question, you have the description that you can see, which is what we're actually asking you to put in your answer. So these are the questions that are marked by the independent assessors. So for the business opportunity, we're asking you to describe the main motivations for your project, the business need, the technological challenge, describe the nearest current state of the art, its limitations, and how you're providing a step change with what you're doing. And for this, you can submit a chart as a single PDF appendix, so you can only upload a single document. So the size limit is 1 megabyte. And for the expression of interest, we're asking it to be a maximum of 1 page, and that's supporting your answer. Question 2, it's all about the market. So if you can specify the market you'll be targeting in the project, any other potential markets. So as Christina said, if there's crossovers to other markets that are outside aerospace, you can mention that here. The structure and dynamics of the market, growth rates with time frames, main supply chains, business models, the current UK position in addressing this market. And as Christina said, if it's a highly innovative project where the market may be unexplored at the moment, explain what your route to market could or might be, its potential size, how the project's going to seek to explore its potential. And if you can tell us what return on investment you expect your project to achieve, and we're expecting you to base these estimates on relevant industry data and tell us how you've calculated this. So question 3, we're asking you about the results of your project. So describing the potential outputs of your project, so products or services, processes or applications. Describe how you'll exploit these outputs. So again, the route to market, protection of intellectual property rights, changes to business models and processes, and any other methods of exploitation and protection. And if you're partnering with research organisations, how are they going to be using the outputs of your project to enrich the research landscape? Question 4, we're asking you about the benefits of your project. So not just economic, but social and environmental benefits that you expect to deliver as a result of your project and when you expect to deliver those. So identify and, where possible, quantify the economic benefits from your project. Identify any expected social impacts, either positive or negative. So, for example, quality of life, social inclusion, jobs safeguarded, education, health and safety. And identify any expected environmental impacts, again, either positive or negative. And any regional impacts of your project. Question 5, it's about your technical approach. So this is describing the areas of work and your objectives. So list all the resources and management needs, provide an overview of the technical approach. So the assessors are looking to see that you've got a well thought out project plan. So you're outlining the main work packages of the project, and the lead partner assigned to those, the cost of those work packages, describe the approach to project management, any key methodologies you're using or key tools, outline the management reporting lines. So your project plan should be in sufficient detail to identify links and dependencies between work packages or milestones. And for this one, we said you must submit a work breakdown structure. So please don't forget your appendix to this. So you'll see some of the wording says you can submit an appendix. For this question, you must submit a work breakdown structure. So again, it's a single document, no larger than 1 megabyte. And please make sure it's legible at 100% magnification. If our assessors can't read it, then they can't actually assess it. So question 6 is asking you what's innovative about your project. So how are you pushing the boundaries? How are you applying existing technologies in a new way? What are your competitors doing? How and why the IP from your project will be free from restrictions and readily exploitable. So give evidence in support of your statements, and you can detail the level of innovation through patent searches, competitor analysis, literature surveys, and you can submit a table, single PDF again, and up to 1 megabyte to support your answer. Question 7, we're asking you about the risks. So we're asking you to be innovative, so we're expecting that your project's going to be risky. So identify the key risks, any uncertainties of your project, including technical, commercial, environmental risks, and highlight those significant ones. Explain how you're going to mitigate those, list any project inputs on the critical path. If the output's likely to be subject to regulatory requirements, that could also be a risk, and how are you going to manage that? So again, the assessors want to see that you've appreciated that there are risks associated with your project. Don't downplay them. Otherwise, it looks like you haven't appreciated fully that your project is a risky endeavour. So question 8, we're asking about your team and facilities. Explain why you and your partners are the right people for the job. So again, the assessors are looking to see that you've got the right skills, you've got the right experience, the right access to facilities that you need. So tell them who's involved, what role they're playing, and why them. So we're asking you to be collaborative, so describe the current relationship between the project partners and how will this change as a result of your project. Any key external partners, so subcontractors, why you're using them. In particular, if you are partnering with people outside the UK or subcontracting people outside the UK, why have you had to select them over someone else? And again, use this also to highlight any gaps in your team that may need to be filled. That could probably also go into your risk question. Question 9 is about the costs. So the assessors are looking to see that your project is reasonable and good value for money. So this is another, you must submit a appendix question. So we're looking for you to explain how this project represents value for money for the taxpayer. Justify the balance of costs and grant across the project partners. Any subcontracted costs, can you justify those? So in your appendix, we're looking for a table that tells us who the partners are, what they're contributing, the amount they're contributing to the project, the amount of grant funding they're requesting, and that helps our assessors and also ATI and BAYS to look at the value for money of your project. So obviously this is the expression of interest phase. You might not have all of the details ironed out, but put as much detail as you can in there so that we can make a good assessment of your submission. Excuse me. Question 10, we're asking you what difference this funding will make to your project. Excuse me. So, are you going to be faster to market? Are you able to engage and collaborate with more partners or more end users? Does this enable you to reduce the risks of your project? So, we're asking you to address both of those. So, please don't just address one, do address both. So why do you need this much funding? And what will happen to the project in the absence of funding? Please make sure that you've answered both parts of that question. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague Jo now. Good timing. Okay, have a strepsil.
Okay, thank you, Alexis. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Lyford. I'm a portfolio manager from Innovate UK. So effectively, I work as part of the competitions team, and I manage the internal competition process across a wide range of different competitions across a number of different sector areas, primarily automotive for me. There's quite a few things that I'll talk to you about today. So I'll talk to you about the funding rules that are in place for this competition. I'll talk to you about how to actually submit an application to us through the Innovation Funding Service portal. And I will also talk to you about what will happen to you should you be successful in applying for this competition, the second stage of the competition, and I will touch briefly on a feasibility competition as well, which we have opening in January, I believe. So the level of grant that you can receive from us depends on two criteria, really. It depends on, firstly, the type of organisation that you are, and secondly, on the type of research that your project represents. And IFS will calculate your grant based on these criteria. So as you can see on this screen here, for all projects, funding is limited to 50% grant intervention rate for all businesses, regardless of their size. And then we allow 100% grant funding for research organisations, be it academic, RTO, public sector, or charities. And another very important point to make on this slide is that for all projects, no one partner can incur more than 70% of the total cost. That's very important for you to bear in mind in terms of eligibility. So this table summarises the funding rules that we have in place for this competition, which I've just mentioned briefly on the previous slide. So obviously we allow for feasibility studies and industrial research across the various competitions that we are running. For businesses, the grant rate is clearly outlined on the slide. It's 50% regardless of your size. We allow 100% grant funding for university partners, or that's 80% of the full economic cost. Other research organisations can also claim 100%, but importantly, they must be non-profit distributing and they must be clearly disseminating their project results as part of the application. And likewise, we also allow for public sector organisations or charities to also claim 100% grant funding within a project, but again, they must be performing research and again, they must be clearly disseminating their project results. This next slide illustrates a potential example of consortium for one of our projects. So as you can see, this is what we'd call a collaborative project because there are at least 2 grant claiming partners within the consortium. And what we've highlighted in blue there, the university partner and the Catapult as the research organisations. As you can see, they are both eligible to receive 100% grant funding. And importantly, their total project cost between them adds up to £150,000, which obviously as a percentage of the total of £500,000 is 30%. And remember that 30% is the limit that we have in terms of project costs that can be incurred by research organisations for these competitions. In terms of actually submitting your application to us for these competitions, so you can review your application before you submit to us. You have the option to review any aspect of your application before you press submit and it goes to us. And we do recommend that you leave plenty of time in which to finalise your application because, as Alexis has already mentioned, the deadlines that we have in place are completely absolute. The way the system works is that we cannot physically allow for any submissions past the noon deadline we have in place, so please do bear that in mind when working on your application. Everything must be marked as complete and your application should show as 100% complete before you then have the option to submit it to us. When you're happy with your application, everything is complete and you are ready to submit it to us, then you simply click on the green icon which confirms your intention to submit your application to us. The table on the next slide, and I appreciate it might not be easily visible for some of you, but it essentially shows the number of applicants for a previous competition that we ran at Innovate UK, submitting their proposals to us each hour leading up to the noon deadline that we had in place for that competition. And as you can see, the majority of applicants do leave it until the final hours, or in some cases the final few minutes, final few seconds, in which to actually submit the application to us, despite us always banging on at these kind of briefing events to perhaps consider submitting earlier than that. Again, we strongly recommend that you submit your application perhaps a little bit earlier than some of these guys here, in good time to avoid any last minute technical issues or any questions that you may have in the very final few minutes. As you can imagine, if it gets to 11:55 on the day of the deadline and you suddenly have a question for us that you need clarity and have to submit, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to get in touch with our customer support team and for us to help you in order to submit before the deadline. So please do consider submitting earlier than noon on the day of the deadline. Once you have submitted, you will have this confirmation page, which also outlines the next steps in the process. So once you have visibility of this, then you know that your application has been submitted successfully. Another point I want to make here, and it sounds like quite a very simple and easy piece of advice, but do make sure you actually submit your application to us. As I mentioned, the nature of IFS is that it will have a progress bar showing the progress of your application all the way through. And once it gets to 100% complete, it will show as 100% complete. But until you actually submit it to us, it doesn't actually come to us for us to do anything with. We've had cases in the past, and actually I had a competition that closed a couple of weeks ago where an applicant did all of their work, put in all of their responses and all the costs and appendices and that kind of thing. They got to 100% complete, but they didn't actually press the green button to submit it to us. I don't know whether they thought that because it said 100% complete, that meant that it was all done. It actually isn't, and unfortunately, we're not able to progress that application because they didn't actually physically submit it within the time parameters that we allow. So another very basic piece of advice, do make sure you actually submit your proposal to us. And once you have submitted, you can return to your dashboard page within the Innovation Funding Service, which shows you the status of any applications that you have submitted to us or that you've started on other competitions. Moving now on to the assessment process that we have in place for these competitions. So all applications that are submitted and are eligible will be assessed by 5 independent assessors from industrial or academic backgrounds, which we then collate to produce a total average score per application. Some key things that assessors look for when they're actually marking your applications include clarity with really the appropriate amount of information. So they don't want to be completely overloaded and bombarded with detail, but at the same time they don't want to have to be left making guesses or assumptions as to what you're trying to say in your application or what you're actually trying to do in your project. So it's about finding the balance between those two. In addition, make sure that your responses are always well justified and also quantified when necessary as well. And finally, a viable opportunity for growth must be clearly presented throughout your application, which therefore necessitates an injection of public funding. Once all applications have been assessed, feedback will be made available to you within your IFS dashboard. And this will obviously explain why you've been given certain scores for certain questions. You'll have a comment, an amalgamated comment across all of the assessors that marked your application for each of the questions within your application form. And the project lead will be notified when this is available for you to view within IFS.
Question around scoring. You mentioned scoring. Is there a scoring scheme?
There is a scoring scheme in place for the assessors, and they have a separate briefing as well, so that we guide them on how to score each of the applications. I don't know the mark. Is it 10 marks per? So 10 marks per question, so they're equally weighted, and obviously there's an average score for an application that we take from each of the 5 assessors that assessed.
So notice that within the system as well, when you're filling in your question, there's guidance within each of the questions, and it gives you a sort of example of what information is being sought, so you can graduate the sort of response that you need to make.
Yeah, so the assessors actually receive quite a similar briefing to what you do when we actually brief them on how to mark your application so that everyone's on the same page.
What do you do with extreme assessments? One gives you a high mark, one gives you a low mark. You had that before.
Yeah, so
Are you cutting these out?
there's quite a thorough process in place for once we get all of the scores back across all of the applications that went for that were submitted and went for assessment. So we do look at all of the scores that we received. Naturally, we flag any that are extreme in those cases, so what we would call an outlier score, where perhaps 4 assessors have really, really rated an application and are given a high score, and 1 has come in with a much lower score, which then brings the average down. We would review that score. We would review all of the comments made across all of those assessors to make sure that whatever total average score we then use going forward is the correct score representative of the assessors, because it may be in some cases that one assessor has potentially misunderstood an application, and in some cases we may remove their score so that it is a representative across the rest of the assessors. And likewise, that can be the case if we have 4 assessors that have marked a score, an application very low, and 1 that's marked very high. So there is a thorough process for reviewing all of the scores once they come back. So as was mentioned, there is a second stage for these competitions for invited applicants from the first stage. The The full stage application form, which will be made available to those invited, looks quite similar to the one that you'll be filling out as part of the expression of interest stage. So as you can see, it's divided into 3 sections. You have firstly the project details. You then have the application questions themselves, which are the ones that are scored when it goes out for assessment. And finally, you have the finance section as well, where you can incorporate all of your project costs for the second stage. Firstly then, we have project details, and again, this pretty much replicates what we have for the EOI stage. Some really quite basic information, so the title, the timescales of your project and whether it's a resubmission or not. The research category, which is obviously limited in this case to industrial research. We ask you to provide a project summary and a public description as well of your project. These are quite useful actually when it goes out for assessment, because even though the assessors don't have to provide a mark against these, they are really useful in actually setting the scene. So do take time to consider what you're going to put in those sections. And finally, we have scope as well. So we ask how your project aligns with the scope of the competition. And obviously it's important to note here that if it's not in scope, it isn't eligible for funding. So if you have any kind of concerns as to whether you feel you're in scope or not, do feel free to get in touch with the team or ATI, who can obviously help you to determine whether you're in scope or not. This is the structure of the application for the second stage as well. There are 10 marked questions for you to provide responses against, and to note here that appendices can be uploaded to supplement the responses that you give to questions 1, 5, 6, 7 and 8. We won't go through this in too much detail now, because I think there's probably going to be a separate applicant briefing when it comes to this stage of the competition. But to reiterate again, detailed guidance will be made available within the Innovation Funding Service as to what you should be putting into each of these questions. The finances for academic partners are handled slightly differently to how we handle business partners, and are processed through, so this is the businesses first of all, I'll come on to the academics. So the project costs that will be entered as part of businesses for the second stage will be incorporated within these cost categories here. These are our standard cost categories that we have in place across the majority of our competitions at Innovate UK. I won't go into lots of detail on this today, because again, that will be covered later on in the process, and there is a lot of detail available to you online as well within these cost categories. But effectively, labour cost is asking you to provide details of people that are going to be working directly on your project to deliver it successfully. Overhead costs can include costs associated with those people that are working directly on your project, as well as supporting functions as well. We then offer you the chance to enter material costs for items that are going to be used solely in delivering your project, capital usage for any new or existing assets that will obviously incur some depreciation through delivering your project, subcontract costs for pieces of work which cannot reasonably be carried out in-house and therefore you want to subcontract to external partners. Travel assistance is quite self-explanatory. And then we have other costs as well for you to enter items that don't reasonably fit into the previous cost categories. But as I say, there is plenty of guidance on this already available online, and it will be covered in much more detail at a later date. We then have the finances for academic partners, and these are processed differently and through the GES system, which you may or may not be familiar with already. The system itself is very familiar with academics and universities who have applied to Innovate UK in the past. It is owned by the research councils, and it validates the costs for us to produce the 80% full economic cost that we then use for going forward in your application. It's important to note here that academic partners will only need to complete the Your Project Cost section within the Innovation Funding Service, and this must be completed for them to be added as a collaborator in your project. Yes?
One thing I would like to get clear. So you have a project lead, which is industrial business. You've got an academic partner. That's the collaboration. So you say that that 30% of the costs only can be academic, but the academy itself, the university is going to be receiving 80% grant, and we will receive 50% grant in our work. Is that correct?
So the business that can incur 70% of the costs
Yes.
can claim 50% grant,
Yeah.
and the university will be claiming 80% full academic cost grant against 30% of the total project costs work-wise.
Of course,
Yes, does that make sense? I appreciate
Yes,
that's quite long-winded,
that's
but
exactly what I'm
yeah.
looking for.
Okay, thank you. So, go on.
Thank you. I'm not planning to have an academic partner, but our company has 2 PhD full-time employees with the company. They have to pay bench fees and they have to pay tuition fees. But I'm planning to put them onto the project 80% of the time. Can I claim the bench fees and the tuition fees on subcontracting?
That may be a question for a slightly later date in terms of what you can completely incorporate within those costs. If they're not on your organisation's payroll, then
They are on my payroll.
They are on the payroll.
Yeah, they're full-time employees. But
Okay.
at the same time, they are subscribed as students at a university.
Okay, so you are limited in terms of the cost that you can put within your labour costs. They need to be things such as the basic salary and tax and national insurance. In terms of stuff over and above that, I would want to clarify with our project finance team on that to be completely sure. I don't want to give you a definitive answer right now, so it's probably best if we take that one offline, if that's okay, just so we can get some
That's fine.
proper
Thank you.
guidance for you.
Put that in through the help desk number, and then we can assign a proper, finance check on that one. Because again, we don't want to advise you wrongly today, but yeah, put in a specific request on that one, and we can tell you a definite answer.
Yeah, and we'll provide that detail at the end of this presentation as well. You could go onto our website to have a look at what sort of things can be incorporated within labour costs, but the nature of running so many competitions across so many different sectors is that there's always new things that get questions that we haven't necessarily covered in our guidance, so I would recommend getting in touch with the experts on that. Okay, successful applicants will then go through to the project setup process within the Innovation Funding Service, which looks a little something like you can see on the screen here, with all of the required milestones listed as headings. So you as applicants therefore have a good level of visibility of what you need to complete and also what we need to complete internally at Innovate UK in order to get your project off the ground and started. So each of these headings must show as complete before we issue you with your offer letter, which is when you can then go and start your project and begin work. One important milestone that we have highlighted here is the return of the signed collaboration agreement, which we require for all collaborative projects at Innovate UK. This essentially stipulates the relationship within the consortium, and from my experience of working at Innovate UK, it's probably the most common cause for delay in terms of projects starting and getting off the ground due to complex issues such as IP arrangements, for example. So we do recommend that you please start working on these as early as possible to avoid any unnecessary delays when you actually want to go and begin working on your project. And once you have actually started your project, it's important to know that grant is always paid quarterly in arrears, and you can only claim grant against costs which have physically been incurred and defrayed during that project period in question. So you therefore need to be very careful with your cash flow as an organisation and also your cost management for the project as well. And projects will also be subject to quarterly monitoring by an appointed monitoring officer, and he or she will introduce themselves to you at the appropriate time later on in the process, should you be successful in applying for the competition. We mentioned about a feasibility study competition as well, which will be opening in January. This slide summarises the eligibility criteria we have in place for this competition. I think a lot of it is probably similar to what we have in place for the other ones as well. So in terms of eligibility, it must be a UK-based organisation of any size who actually leads the project. they must be claiming grant, the lead must be claiming grant, and they must be working in collaboration with others, and obviously by collaborators we mean other organisations that are also claiming grant as part of the project. The costs can range from £255,000 and £500,000, and the length can be up to 12 months, but they must start by August 2019, so that's obviously very important as well. The questions are the same, and that you have 10 questions and the detailed finance section as well. 5 appendices which you can upload to supplement your responses as part of your application, and the grant funding again is 50% for businesses regardless of their size and 100% grant for research organisations. And finally, in terms of research participation, it's up to 30% of the total eligible project costs that can be incurred by any research organisations within your consortium. Finally, it's worth noting at this stage that there is a portfolio approach which could be applied across all of these competitions as part of the ATI portfolio. So we are looking to fund high-risk, high-impact projects that demonstrate visionary, revolutionary and disruptive solutions to UK aerospace challenges. So it may be that we eventually apply some kind of portfolio approach which incorporates a more wide variety of technologies, and that will, as I say, be applied across the 3 competitions: fast-track collaborative R&D, collaborative R&D and feasibility studies as well. Ultimately, I would still say that it's the score which drives the decision as to whether you're going to be funded or not. So it's always quality that we take into consideration first before any kind of portfolio approach is applied. As we mentioned, do please get in touch with us if you have any further questions after today. There's some really quite useful resources on the slide here, particularly at the top, our customer support team. If you get in touch with them regarding any questions you have, everything is tracked and recorded. They're very knowledgeable and very responsive, and they will always pass on queries, if necessary, to those who are best in a position to provide the best response. So do feel free to get in touch with them if you wish. But in the meantime, I think we have some time now between myself and Alexis. If you have any questions at all regarding the application process in place for these competitions.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Let's give you the microphone. Can we capture your question? Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the role of non-grant claiming partners in the eligibility requirements, i.e. if there were 2 businesses, one claiming or sort of with, say, 200k of costs and another with 20k of costs that would ordinarily fall out of the 70-30 rule, if there was another non-grant claiming partner who was incurring, say, 200k of costs, so it became not 70-30. Is that allowed, or is the eligibility split only between the grant claiming?
So the eligibility split in terms of no one partner incurring more than 70% of the costs is just to do with the costs, not the grant. So
Okay.
In the case that you outlined there, it would be fine if you had a non-grant claiming partner incurring costs, because they would still go towards that total. One thing I would say is that it may have some implications in terms of when it gets assessed as to whether it's a true consortium, so that's something to bear in mind. But yeah, as far as eligibility is concerned, that would be acceptable.
Brilliant, thanks. And just to clarify, for the initial EOI submission, is that made only by the lead partner? Because usually it's the financial information which sort of brings in the green boxes that get ticked for it being a collaboration. Is that the case for the EOI? Do they have to be invited to the portal and confirm their inclusion through that, or does that only come in at the second stage?
I think, Alexis, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said that they can be invited as a collaborator at EOI stage. They don't have to be,
Okay.
because obviously they don't have to list their costs for the EOI stage, but at full stage, the expectation is that every single collaborator within your organisation is listed as an official collaborator in the project, and obviously their costs have been put into the system as well. If you wanted to have the support of your collaborators in putting your application together in terms of your responses, then I would recommend inviting them as collaborators at this stage, because through IFS you can then assign questions to them so they can obviously have input as well, but you don't have to list them as collaborators at this stage.
Okay, and does that mean if potentially you engage a further partner between the EOI and second stage, is that allowed, or actually are the costs you present in the appendix with the EOI, do they have to precisely match what would go in as the second stage if it was successful?
I think I'll ask Alexis to clarify that one.
Yeah, so if you go into IFS and you have a look at the brief, we have said that we will monitor any changes that you make between the EOI and the full stage application. So that's kind of changing partners or changing subcontractors, things like that, changing costs. So we would expect to see a justification of that change when it comes to the full stage application. But yeah, we understand that things can change between that EOI phase and actually submitting that full stage application.
Thanks.
May I make a clarification? So in between EOI and full stage, you will also get an opportunity to interact with the ATI on your proposal, and some of the feedback we might provide is to for a lead participant to consider a certain specific type of partner to make your project better. So at that stage, if you were to engage with that type of partner and change from EOI to full application, in that case it would actually be a positive change on the project. So as long as the changes are justified based on the feedback from Innovate UK, independent assessment out of EOI and ATI feedback, then that's justifiable and actually positive.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a very broad clarification on the both resource end from a business point of view. Obviously, it's a 50% to the SME over a couple of years. So you could be looking at us needing to put in about £150,000. What is the criteria at which you want to see that we have that money? Is that we've ring-fenced 150,000, it's over the other 2 years, or is it to show that we have cash flow that can support the 150 over the 2-3 years of the project?
So that would always be handled on a case-by-case basis by our project finance team, who would obviously carry out the viability check on your project and you as an organisation, should you be successful. One mechanism that we have used in that team in the past is that we would look to see that you would have the first quarter of the costs, that money in place before you start the project, because obviously you're getting paid grant quarterly in arrears. So you effectively have to fund the first quarter of your project yourself before you get any money back. So it might be that they use that as an indication as to what money you have in place, rather than the full £150,000 in that case.
Two questions. The first one is, if a British limited company has acquired a US company and we transfer a bit of the work over there, and that US company belongs to the British company and transfers its profits, is that work unclaimable or not? And the second question is, let's say we find a wind tunnel or an icing tunnel appropriate for research, again in the US. Is that also unclaimable? Thank you. Sorry, was that a tough one?
Those costs, to the best of my knowledge, would be best included within the subcontract costs. If you had a piece of work which you were looking to be carried out by a linked company, such as an organisation that you own or a parent company, sister, whatever, they would have to be carried out entirely at cost, so no profit could go into the fee that you have for that piece of work. And that subcontract cost is where you include the use of any kind of assets that aren't owned by you but are owned by, in this case, the American organisation. So you'd have to put that piece of work into the subcontract costs of your project.
Thank you.
I'm just sensing a tension I felt before, and maybe I could just make a comment, and I quite like a comment back, right? It's not quite a specific question. I've been involved in R&D projects for some decades, and I've worked with IUK and its many ancestors for a long, long time. And there's always seems to be a kind of discrete terminology about the calls like this, about the product, the result, the ROI, the exploitation, as if this, you're expecting another light bulb or another steam engine to come out of this. Whereas my experience, having worked for decades, is that this kind of technology evolves over many years. And we've been running a software company for 40 years now, and we have one big product, and it keeps on moving forward. We found over the decades that the best way to progress is to work collaboratively with other complementary business or technology segments, with academia, and particularly with the big companies, in our case, aerospace companies. And they've sometimes been partners with us, but more generally, they're a non-costing partner, but providing use cases, saying that's what we want next. And they can't get it off the big CAD or CAE companies, but they want to come to us for simulation improvements. And by working with other SMEs, we can make a step forward. But our kind of step forward in a project is just incremental. It's not discrete like that whole terminology of these calls. So we always find a great tension here of how do we express that step forward as something tidily discrete to suit your criteria. And I think this is true of EU projects as well as UK government ones over the decades. So, we're just struggling with that tension. I'm reading all this, thinking, how do we actually put our next step forward that we're being called upon to make by the big industries to suit your criteria? So it's a comment, and I would appreciate some sort of general comment back.
Yeah, I suppose as Innovate UK, we're not funding like what we would term as incremental change. It is something that is a step change. So it is something that, so would our funding mean that you can collaborate with different people who you wouldn't otherwise collaborate with, that will make something that you couldn't make yourself, will produce something that you couldn't produce yourself?
The step changes tend to be decades of effort, tens of man years, not the 2 or 3 or 4 man years of this kind of size of project. So it's very hard to get that unit of progress to suit you.
I just, I see what you're saying about the difference between, the incremental and step change, but I think the wording is very carefully chosen not to rule out incremental as well, because the incremental, yes, I'm disagreeing it's in some respects on this one. You're asking for a general comment. We don't specifically say incremental is out of scope, but what we are looking for you to actually do is explain what, how incremental is it that you're doing. That increment itself can be very gradual, or it could be a step. So it's left for the applicant yourself to actually define what it is and what is innovative about what you're putting in this proposal. Yeah, that's exactly what we want to see. So it is carefully worded, and and that's my expectation, is that you as the applicant tell the assessors why it is in scope, what's the advancement that you're making over the current state of the art that you're at, and what the expected impact of that will be. Is that okay?
I don't know if we answered the gentleman's question earlier about using subcontractors that are overseas. So you can, if there's an argument to use subcontractors that are not in the UK, then you need to include that argument and that rationale of why you are proposing to use them. And we'd also probably look at what kind of cost that represents, what proportion of the cost that represents for your application. Sorry?
Even at stage 1, is that the detail of the stage 1?
If you know that you're going to do it already at stage 1, then yeah, please include that in your application.
Probably right enough about that. Yeah, so it's a question about intellectual property. So if the collaboration involves a private sector business and a university, is there an expectation, because this is public funding, that the technology that results from the innovation is then put into the public domain, or can it remain the property or under the ownership of the collaborative partners? Does that make sense?
So yeah, with IP, we're not particularly concerned with the details of your collaboration agreement, so who would actually own that IP. We want to see that your collaboration agreement is in place, and we want to see that you are disseminating the knowledge from this project. So yes, for research organisations, they should be disseminating it through papers and further research collaborations. And we want to hear from the business what you're going to do to exploit this information. So you don't have to make it publicly available, it can be your IP, but what are you doing that's exploiting the results of your project?
Does that answer the question that you were saying there? Are you looking at what steps are in place that you don't have to do an immediate disclosure? We're interested in understanding how you, as a consortium, how you might protect and exploit the IP downstream. And if you,
I mean, there's some conflict of interest, because from a commercial advantage perspective, the aerospace company, the aerospace business will seek competitive advantage through keeping that information and research for themselves.
yes.
But from a published paper or research perspective, obviously as a university, we would wish to make that kind of
Indeed, and
research.
prior to joining Innovate, I've seen different mechanisms for dealing with this one, and it can include delayed actual a time frame that's suitable for actually protection of any necessary IP, and that might be through filing for PCT or, but some sort of delay in terms of that actually publication. But again, it's showing that in your application how you actually, you've thought through this process, and anything that is commercially sensitive or exploitable, you're putting in the necessary steps to actually make sure that happens before a public disclosure is made to actually support the research.
Just to answer the gentleman, we were in the NATO project 2 years ago, and they understood this, what you were asking, and they let us disseminate up to the last point before we applied for data. So, they will help you. Until you get into the phase where you actually apply for one, then it will be sent.
Okay,
So
thank you.
it's all about communication. I was very happy actually with the way that Nathan was dealing with it.
Sorry, it's just sort of slightly, maybe it's against the scope. I know that this is all about step changes in these technologies, but actually to exploit them, a lot of it is actually, the innovation is needed in the transverse processes on certification, digital, safety cases, and all of that, particularly in the aerospace. So where is the drive for innovation in those sort of transverse? Because part of the business case is I can't do research in this area unless I can address those bigger issues, which is starting to be a requirement.
Do you want to tell them, Christine?
Yeah, so the bullet points as part of the scope are the hooks for the work. We have the value streams, which are usually more hardware orientated, but we have the cross-cutting enablers, which are cross-cutting, as the name talks about, and they're also more around the processes and the tools required to ultimately deliver and enable the delivery of the value streams. So they are very much embedded into those categories. The hooks are not only the hardware, but also the capabilities, the processes that you require to deliver those ultimately. Does that help, Julia?
I'm not sure, because at the moment I think you'll get lots of bright ideas, but then it gets to the exploitation is because you only go up to TRL 5, 6, a lot of these ideas will then not go to market. And that's sort of where the innovation really needs to be, particularly if you go more digital, more software, it's a completely different doctrine, as we've discussed previously.
It is, and even the TRL, the technology readiness levels for software are completely different. And I understand that there's people usually talk about the valley of death between the low TRL and the medium TRL, getting the technologies through from academia. There's also a very big barrier between having a demonstrated technology into bringing it into an actual product into the market. Unfortunately, state aid works like that, and we are only allowed to fund up to a certain stage. After that, it is up to the companies to decide their internal business case is strong enough to put PV funding, private venture funding, into developing those technologies forward. And I do sympathize. I know that for software, it is very different, and it is in some ways harder to justify, back to the point of the gentleman, that it is not as visible, it is not physical, it is more difficult, but unfortunately, or fortunately, we have opportunities. They just don't cover the whole of the spectrum.
What I'm saying is, though, I think where I'm getting to is that cost beyond TRL6 in this new digital environment is now becoming prohibitive unless we do something innovative or something different, which needs to go back down into the research. So that was, yes, I know it's hooked by an individual, but if you do it by an individual technology, you're not necessarily going to get something that changes that doctrine or that dynamics.
Mm.
A general question, following a little bit that theme. You're asking us for high risk, high impact, visionary, revolutionary, disruptive technology. You're also asking SMEs to take leadership, in particular in the fast track, but you're only willing to fund 50%. This is all lower TRL. According to state aid regulations, you could go up to 70. Why didn't you decide to fight for that? It should be. It should be possible. I know you can't change this now, but I think it should be 70% for SMEs. Why didn't you decide not to do it?
May I point out two assumptions you've made? You said only 50%. I would argue that to enable your business to have a technology development that's going to be utilized within 2-3 years after, and getting 50% funding is quite a good opportunity in terms of return and support of what you're doing. So I wouldn't say only 50% because you're getting support from government. The second point is you mentioned that we have decided not to fight for a higher rate for those developments that are not categorized within industrial research.
We're still
I can
carrying the
assure you
scars.
the people in this room have fought, and very much so. When the ATI was established, the premise was that it was a 50-50 collaboration between the UK aerospace industry and government. That means 50% for everything. And if we provide more than 50% for businesses, the contract is not valid. We got 3.9 billion unprecedented from of which half comes from government, with the premise that the industry were eager to put that 50% down. So there's not much we can do with Treasury. That's a rule of the game. What we have been able to do for this competition is, if you're familiar with the ATI strategic program, that's a hard stop 50% at project level, which means you can have 70% as an SME, but somebody else in your consortia would have to get less than their allowed grant to support that. With these particular projects, we don't have a cap at 50% at project cost. So we think that will enable more collaboration between businesses and academia and research organizations, because you're still getting your 50% grant, and the universities and research organizations are still getting their 100% grant. So it's an improvement to what you would get from the strategic program.
Yeah, so good. We fought really hard. Christina's absolutely right. The consultation that we had, particularly with SMEs as well, when they looked at the collaborations, was the value of actually SMEs collaborating with universities and or with research and technology organizations. So in this way, you're not penalized by wanting to work with the university. The university gets its 100% of 8% of FEC funding. You as an SME organization get your 50%, rather than having to take a reduction in grant to actually make up the overall 50-50 balance. So yes, I think, on the fast tracks as well, Christina's absolutely right. We're looking to make this impact within a couple of years. The same funding applies for the fast track as it does for the CR&D component. So again, that was done with consultation prior to actually launching this competition. So we hope there is real value there for SMEs being able to be unlocked now of working directly with universities yourself or RTOs. We will continue to fight in the future, though. So we might have lost that particular battle, but we'll carry on fighting.
What I see is, you see the need for the 70%. Even I've got the response that 50% is enough. You see the need for the 70% for SMEs. So that's a bit contradictory.
I've done it from both sides of the fence as well. And having worked and looked at technology transfer into SMEs, I know where you're coming from. Yeah. Any more questions? Or am I stopping you now from your lunch, which I'm hoping has arrived outside? Just want to say thank you then, if we finish with the questions. Thank you all for turning up today and making this a really good discussion. I wish you well with your applications for these particular two streams and for feasibilities if you're looking to do that. Again, can I just reiterate today some of the main points? Loads of information on the Aerospace Technology Institute website. If you haven't downloaded a copy of the strategy, please do so. It's a really fantastic document and will help you tremendously making these applications into these three strands of this competition. Also, please use the help desk. Please take up the offer of having discussions with the Aerospace Technology Institute directly. They're there to sort of help and guide you through this process, as well as Innovate UK and our colleagues at BAYES as well. So do please use the information channels and also the communication channels that we've set up to help you with your applications. And again, I wish you well with your applications. Thank you.